Welcome to HOA Backfired. The reinspection fee showed up before the storm ended. Karen yelled that my walkway had a thin icy glaze and she was filming for the record and the fine would hit today unless I corrected it in front of witnesses. That curb snow pile is a violation and I am documenting it as we speak, she shouted, holding her phone at arm's length like a weapon. I stood on my porch ledge in the morning cold, still holding my coffee mug, watching Vanessa Johnson wave her portable thermal printer around like it could summon a municipal code inspector on the spot. She wore a white belted wool coat with the hood up and pink earmuffs, her red hair pulled into a sleek low ponytail, and she was breathing frost clouds so fast it looked like she was huffing rage into the Arizona dawn. This is Goodyear, Arizona, in the second week of January, and we are standing in the Meadows Village Association, a master-planned community where the board runs snow patrol after every storm. I work as a park ranger, and I value quiet and rules that make sense. I moved here last fall hoping for a low-maintenance neighborhood where I could focus on my schedule. Instead, I got Vanessa, the election committee chair who manipulates ballots and proxies, and she decided my ice scraper was visible storage. The ice scraper sat on my porch ledge, a standard orange plastic handle with a foam grip, the kind you buy at any gas station. I left it there after clearing my windshield 2 days ago. Vanessa claimed it violated visible storage rules during snow emergency enforcement, where she insists normal rules do not apply. She already printed a notice from her portable printer, the ink still warm, and she waved it at me while repeating her catchphrase for the second time in 30 seconds. "I do not negotiate with winter violations," she said, her voice sharp enough to crack ice. I asked her to show me the clause. She ignored me and kept filming, panning the phone from my face to the scraper to the curb snow pile. The pile was standard post-plow debris, a 2-foot ridge of gray slush mixed with sand, sitting between the curb and the street where the city plow left it. Vanessa claimed it was my responsibility to move it within 24 hours under snow emergency rules, even though the city explicitly told homeowners not to touch curb piles because they clear them on a second pass. I knew that because I called them the day before. Vanessa did not care. She stepped closer, her boots crunching on the frost, and told me the fine was $250 and it would double if I did not comply by noon. She also said she was calling a tow company to boot my truck if I parked on the street during snow removal hours, which she defined as any time she decided snow removal was happening. I asked if she had documentation of those hours. She said, "Your camera does not matter. My minutes are the truth." That line landed clean and cold, and I filed it away immediately because I knew it would come back to bite her. I let her talk because every word was helping me. I kept my voice calm and asked if she had a copy of the emergency rules. She told me to check the portal, but when I pulled out my phone and opened the association app, the emergency rules section was blank. I showed her the screen. She said it was my responsibility to stay informed and that ignorance was not an excuse. Then she turned and walked back to her white sedan, parked at an angle across 2 visitor spots, and drove off with her amber strobe light flashing in the rear window like she was responding to a 5-alarm fire. I went inside and made a list. I was in the middle of a renovation schedule, replacing the deck boards and resealing the crawl space before the next storm hit, and delays could cost me thousands in contractor fees and material waste. Vanessa's fines and tow threats were not just annoying, they were a direct financial problem. I needed my documentation ready, because she already threatened to call police for alleged winter hazards, and I had maybe 6 hours before she followed through. I started with photos. I took 20 shots of the porch, the scraper, the curb pile, the sidewalk, and the street. I measured the scraper dimensions and the pile size. I downloaded the city snow removal FAQ and saved the section that said homeowners must not move curb piles. Then I checked the HOA covenant and found the visible storage rule, which defined storage as items left out for more than 72 consecutive hours. The scraper had been there for 48 hours. I was clean. If you are enjoying this chaos, hit that like button and subscribe for more wild HOA stories where the paperwork wins. By 10 in the morning, Vanessa posted in the neighborhood group chat. She did not name me directly, but she described my address and said a resident was creating a slip hazard during a winter storm by refusing to clear ice and by leaving equipment in plain view. She added a photo of my porch taken from the sidewalk, zoomed in on the scraper, and she tagged it with a red circle emoji and a warning emoji. 3 neighbors replied within minutes, asking if anyone was hurt. One person said she saw the post and was worried about her kids walking to the bus stop. Another said the HOA should act fast. I replied in the thread with the city FAQ link and a photo of my cleared walkway. I explained the scraper was temporary and that I had no control over the curb pile. Vanessa replied immediately, saying I was deflecting and that the board would address it at the next compliance hearing. She said the hearing was already scheduled for that afternoon at 2, which was news to me because I never received a notice. I asked in the thread when the notice was sent. She said it was hand-delivered. I checked my porch and my mailbox. Nothing. That was escalation step 1, painting me as a hazard during a storm in a public forum where neighbors could pile on. I knew step 2 was coming, and it did not take long. At 11:30, Vanessa showed up again, this time with 2 other board members. One was a man in his 60s wearing a puffy vest and carrying a clipboard. The other was a woman in her 40s with a ski jacket and a tablet. They walked straight onto my property without knocking, heading for the porch. I opened the door before they reached it. Vanessa said they were conducting an inspection under emergency powers. I asked to see the authorization. She waved a printed page with the HOA logo at the top, but she held it at an angle so I could not read the text. The man with the clipboard said they needed to document the scraper and measure the ice coverage on my walkway. I told them I did not consent to entry. Vanessa said consent was not required during a snow emergency. I asked when the emergency was declared. She said it was declared verbally at an executive session 2 days ago. I asked for the minutes. She said they were not public yet. I stepped outside and stood between them and the door. I told them they could observe from the sidewalk, but they were not stepping onto my porch. Vanessa said I was obstructing official business. I said I was protecting my property. The man with the clipboard sighed and said they could take measurements from the street. Vanessa glared at me, then turned and walked back to the sidewalk. She told the man to photograph everything. He took a few shots with his phone. Vanessa pulled out her portable thermal printer again and printed another notice on the spot. She handed it to me and said I had until 5 to comply or the fine would increase to $500 and a lien would be filed. I read the notice. It listed 3 violations: visible storage, failure to clear a slip hazard, and obstruction of an HOA inspection. The slip hazard line referenced a thin icy glaze on my walkway, which did not exist. I walked them over to the walkway and showed them the bare concrete, dry except for a few damp spots from melting frost. Vanessa pointed at a small patch near the edge and said it was reflective, which meant ice. I knelt down and touched it. It was water. I wiped it with my glove and held up the wet fabric. She said the photo evidence would speak for itself. Then she left. That was escalation step 2, trespassing onto my property with backup to bait a reaction on camera. I did not give her one, but I knew the pattern now. She was building a narrative where I was uncooperative and dangerous, and she was counting on me to lose my temper or make a mistake. I was not going to. At 1 in the afternoon, I got an email from the management company. It was not from Vanessa, it was from a compliance coordinator named Derek, and it had contradictory clearing instructions. The email said I was required to clear all ice from my walkway and driveway within 12 hours of snowfall, but I was also prohibited from using salt or chemical de-icers because they damage landscaping. It said I should use sand, but sand was considered a slip hazard if not removed within 6 hours. It also said I was responsible for clearing the curb pile, contradicting the city guidance I already had. The email ended with a line saying failure to comply would result in escalating fines and possible legal action. I replied and asked for clarification. I attached the city FAQ and asked which rule took precedence. Derek replied within 10 minutes, saying the HOA rules were separate from city rules and that I was expected to follow both. I asked how that was possible when they contradicted each other. He did not reply. I printed everything and put it in a folder. Then I called a city code enforcement officer I knew from a training seminar last year. His name was Marcus, and he worked in the Zoning and Compliance Division. I explained the situation and asked if the HOA could override city snow removal guidance. He said no, and he said if the HOA was threatening fines for following city instructions, that was a problem. He offered to send me a written statement confirming the city policy. I said yes, and he emailed it to me 20 minutes later. I printed that too. At 2, I showed up at the clubhouse for the compliance hearing. The room was a narrow rectangle with a folding table at the front and a dozen chairs arranged in rows. Vanessa sat at the table with the 2 board members from earlier and a 4th person I did not recognize, a man in a suit who I assumed was the HOA attorney. There were no other residents in the room. Vanessa called the hearing to order and said I was being charged with 3 violations stemming from winter noncompliance. She read the violations aloud, adding detail that was not in the notice. She said the ice scraper had been on my porch for a week, which was false. She said the curb pile was blocking drainage, which was also false. She said I refused to allow an inspection, which was technically true but left out the part where they trespassed. I asked to speak. Vanessa said I would have a chance after the board presented evidence. The man with the clipboard stood up and showed photos on his phone. The photos were all from that morning, zoomed in tight on the scraper and the walkway. One photo showed the damp spot Vanessa claimed was ice, but the angle and lighting made it look darker and more textured than it was in person. Vanessa said the photos proved I was creating a hazard. The woman with the tablet nodded. I raised my hand. Vanessa ignored me. I raised it higher and said I had evidence. She sighed and said I could present it. I stood up and pulled out my folder. I showed the photos I took that morning, time-stamped and GPS tagged, showing the dry walkway and the scraper placement. I showed the city FAQ and Marcus's written statement. I showed the covenant language about visible storage and the 72-hour rule. I said the scraper had been there for less than 48 hours and that I was following city guidance on the curb pile. Vanessa said the city guidance was irrelevant because the HOA had emergency powers. I asked to see the emergency declaration. She said it was in the minutes. I asked for a copy of the minutes. She said they had not been finalized. I asked when they would be finalized. She said that was not my concern. The man in the suit, the attorney, leaned forward and said something quietly to Vanessa. She frowned and said the board would take a brief recess. They stepped into a side hallway. I heard raised voices but could not make out the words. They came back 5 minutes later. Vanessa said the board was upholding all 3 violations and that the fine total was $750 due within 10 days. She said if I did not pay, a lien would be filed and my access to common areas would be suspended. She also said the scraper had to be removed immediately and the curb pile had to be cleared by 8 the next morning or an additional daily fine of $100 would apply. I asked if I could appeal. She said I could submit a written appeal to the board within 7 days, but the fines would remain in effect during the appeal. I asked if the attorney had reviewed the evidence. The attorney did not look at me. Vanessa said the board had full confidence in its decision. Then she adjourned the hearing and stood up. I walked out and sat in my truck in the parking lot. I was angry, but I was also thinking clearly. Vanessa's pattern was obvious now. She was using emergency powers as a blank check, refusing to document anything and counting on the board to back her no matter what. The attorney was either complicit or too scared to push back. I needed leverage, and I needed it fast. That night, I did two things. First, I filed a formal complaint with the management company, attaching all my evidence and requesting a review of the emergency powers claim. Second, I sent an email to every board member individually, including Vanessa, asking for a copy of the emergency declaration minutes and a written explanation of how the HOA snow removal policy interacted with city guidance. I kept the tone professional and factual. I did not accuse anyone of anything. I just asked questions. The next morning, I got a reply from Derek at the management company. He said my complaint was under review and that someone would follow up within 5 business days. That was useless. I also got a reply from one of the board members, the woman with the tablet. Her name was Lisa, and she said she was not aware of any formal emergency declaration and that she thought the hearing was just for routine violations. She said she would look into it. That was more interesting. At 7:30, Vanessa showed up again. This time she had a tow truck with her. The truck was idling at the curb, amber strobe flashing, and the driver was standing next to my vehicle with a tire clamp device in his hands. Vanessa was talking to him, pointing at my truck and holding her portable thermal printer. I grabbed my coat and my folder and ran outside. The driver looked up when I got close. I asked what was happening. He said the HOA requested a boot for a vehicle parked in violation of snow emergency rules. I asked what rules. He did not know. Vanessa stepped in and said my truck was parked on the street during restricted hours, which she claimed started at 6 in the morning. I pointed at the curb and said there was no signage indicating restricted hours. She said the signs were being installed later that day, but the rules were already in effect. I asked how I was supposed to know. She said it was my responsibility to stay informed. I pulled out my phone and showed the driver the management company email from the day before, the one with contradictory instructions. I said the HOA was applying rules that had not been properly communicated and that I was complying with all published guidelines. The driver looked at Vanessa. She said the board had voted, and the violation stood. The driver looked at me. I pulled out the tow release receipt I had printed earlier, a blank form I picked up from the city impound lot, and I said I would file a complaint with the city if he proceeded without a valid municipal code violation. I also said I had video evidence of the entire interaction and that I would share it with his company. The driver hesitated. Vanessa said he was wasting time. The driver said he needed to see written authorization from the HOA before he could proceed. Vanessa tried to print a notice on her thermal printer, but the paper jammed. She shook the printer and cursed under her breath. The driver said he would come back when the paperwork was sorted. He put the clamp device back in his truck and drove off. Vanessa stared at me, her face red, her breath fogging the air. "I do not negotiate with winter violations," she said again, her voice tight. Then she got in her car and left. That was the turning point. I realized Vanessa was not following any real process. She was making it up as she went, using the thermal printer and the emergency powers language to create an illusion of authority. But the illusion only worked if no one pushed back. The tow driver pushed back, and she folded. I needed to keep pushing. I called Marcus again and told him what happened. He said the HOA could not enforce parking restrictions that contradicted city code without going through a formal process with the city traffic department. He said if they tried to tow me again, I should call the police non-emergency line and report it as an illegal tow attempt. He also said he would make a note in his file about the HOA's winter enforcement practices. That gave me another piece of leverage. Next, I filed a records request with the HOA. I asked for copies of all board meeting minutes from the last 6 months, all emails related to snow emergency declarations, and all documentation of parking restrictions. The covenant said the HOA had to respond within 10 business days. I sent the request via email and certified mail, so there was no question about delivery. Then I waited. For 2 days, nothing happened. No more visits, no more notices, no more tow trucks. I kept checking the group chat, but Vanessa did not post. I kept checking my email, but the management company did not reply. I started to think maybe she was backing off. On the 3rd day, I got a certified letter. It arrived mid-storm, just after noon, when the snow was falling thick and fast. I signed for it and opened it on the porch. The letter was from the HOA board, signed by Vanessa and the 2 other members from the hearing. It said I was being fined an additional $1,000 for repeated violations, obstruction of HOA business, and failure to comply with emergency directives. It said the total fine was now $1,750, and if I did not pay within 7 days, the HOA would place a lien on my property and begin foreclosure proceedings. The letter was dated 3 days earlier, but the postmark was from that morning. That was set piece 1, a certified letter arriving mid-storm, and I caught the date mismatch immediately. I took photos of the envelope, the postmark, and the letter. The date mismatch meant they backdated the letter to make it look like I had more time than I actually did, and they mailed it late so I would miss the deadline. That was fraud, and I had proof. I called Marcus and told him. He said I should contact an attorney. I said I was already planning to. He said if the HOA was backdating notices and threatening foreclosure without due process, that was a serious problem and the city might have grounds to intervene. He said he would pass my information to the city attorney's office and recommend they look into it. That afternoon, I met with an attorney. Her name was Jennifer, and she specialized in HOA disputes. I showed her everything. The photos, the emails, the city statements, the backdated letter, the group chat screenshots. She reviewed it all and said I had a strong case. She said the HOA was violating its own covenant by not following proper notice procedures, and the backdated letter was evidence of bad faith. She said she could send a demand letter to the HOA and the management company outlining the violations and demanding they rescind the fines and stop the harassment. She said if they did not respond, we could file a lawsuit. I asked how much it would cost. She said the demand letter was $500, and if it went to court, it could be several thousand. I thought about my renovation budget and my contractor deadlines. I did not want to spend that money, but I also did not want Vanessa to win. I told Jennifer to send the letter. She drafted it that night and emailed me a copy for review. The letter was 3 pages, single-spaced, and it was brutal. It listed every procedural violation, every contradictory instruction, every backdated document. It cited the covenant, state law, and case precedent. It demanded that the HOA rescind all fines, provide copies of the emergency declaration minutes, and cease all enforcement actions related to winter compliance. It gave them 10 days to respond. Jennifer sent it the next morning via email and certified mail to the board, the management company, and the HOA attorney. 2 days later, Vanessa posted again in the group chat. This time, she went further. She said a resident was refusing to cooperate with emergency measures and that the board was considering additional enforcement options. She said the resident had hired an attorney, which she claimed was proof of bad faith. She said the board would hold a special meeting to address the issue and that all residents were encouraged to attend to hear the facts. She set the meeting for that Friday at 6 in the evening at the clubhouse. I replied in the thread and said I was happy to attend and that I would bring my documentation. Vanessa did not reply, but 3 other residents did. One said she was concerned about safety and wanted to hear both sides. Another said the board should follow proper procedures. A third said she was tired of the drama and wished everyone would just get along. That last one stung, but I ignored it. The day before the meeting, something happened that I did not expect. Lisa, the board member who said she was not aware of the emergency declaration, sent me a private message. She said she had reviewed the board records and found that there was no formal emergency declaration. She said the executive session Vanessa referenced never happened. She said Vanessa had been acting on her own, using emergency language to justify enforcement actions that the full board never approved. Lisa said she was going to bring it up at the meeting, but she wanted me to know ahead of time. That was the twist. The HOA attorney refused to represent them after seeing my packet, and the room panicked. Lisa's message confirmed it. Vanessa had been running a solo operation, and the board was starting to realize it. Friday came fast. I spent the morning preparing. I printed copies of everything: the photos, the emails, the city statements, the backdated letter, Jennifer's demand letter, Lisa's message. I put it all in a 3-ring binder with tabs. I also printed a timeline, 1 page, showing every interaction from the first notice to the latest group chat post. I made 15 copies and brought them all. At 5:30, I drove to the clubhouse. The parking lot was fuller than I expected. I counted at least 20 cars. Inside, the meeting room was packed, every chair was taken, and people were standing along the walls. Vanessa sat at the front table with the 2 board members from the hearing. The HOA attorney was not there. I asked the woman at the door if he was coming. She said she did not know. Vanessa called the meeting to order at 6. She started with a long statement about the importance of community safety during winter weather and the board's responsibility to enforce rules fairly. She said a resident had filed a baseless complaint and hired an attorney to intimidate the board. She said the board stood by its decisions and would not be bullied. She did not say my name, but everyone knew who she was talking about. Then she opened the floor for public comment. I raised my hand. She called on me last after 5 other people spoke. 3 of them supported the board. 2 said they were concerned about the process. When my turn came, I stood up and walked to the front. I handed out the binders. I said I wanted to walk everyone through the timeline and the evidence. Vanessa said I had 3 minutes. I said I needed 10. She said 3. I said fine. I started with the scraper. I showed the photo of it on the porch and the covenant language about the 72-hour rule. I said it had been there for less than 48 hours. Vanessa interrupted and said the rule did not apply during snow emergencies. I asked her to show me the emergency declaration. She said it was in the minutes. I said the minutes did not exist because the executive session never happened. Lisa, sitting at the table, nodded. Vanessa's face went red. I moved to the curb pile. I showed the city FAQ and Marcus's statement. I said the HOA was requiring me to violate city policy. Vanessa said the HOA had separate authority. I said that was not how municipal code worked. A man in the audience, a former city councilman, raised his hand and said I was correct. Vanessa told him he was out of order. I moved to the backdated letter. I held up the envelope and pointed at the postmark. I said the letter was dated 3 days before it was mailed, which meant the board was trying to manipulate the deadline. Vanessa said it was a clerical error. I said it was fraud. The room went quiet. Then I showed Jennifer's demand letter. I read the first paragraph aloud, the one that said the HOA was violating its own covenant and state law. I said I was not trying to bully anyone. I was trying to stop harassment. I said I had followed every rule, provided every document, and responded to every notice, and the board kept moving the goalposts. I said that was not fair, and it was not legal. Vanessa stood up. She said I was grandstanding. She said the board had made its decision, and the fine stood. I said I wanted to hear from the HOA attorney. Vanessa said he was not available. I said that was convenient. Lisa stood up and said the attorney had resigned. The room erupted. People started yelling questions. Someone asked why the attorney resigned. Someone asked if the board had insurance. Someone asked if Vanessa had authority to issue fines on her own. Vanessa banged her hand on the table and said the meeting was out of order. Lisa said the meeting needed to pause so the board could discuss the situation privately. Vanessa said there was nothing to discuss. The other board member, the man with the clipboard, said he agreed with Lisa. Vanessa was outvoted. They took a recess. I sat down and waited. People came up to me and asked questions. I kept my answers short and factual. One woman said she had received a similar notice last year and paid the fine because she did not know how to fight it. She said she wished she had seen my evidence. I gave her a copy of the binder. The board came back 20 minutes later. Vanessa looked like she had been crying. Lisa spoke first. She said the board had reviewed the evidence and determined that the fines were issued without proper authorization. She said the emergency powers language was not supported by any formal declaration, and the enforcement actions did not follow covenant procedures. She said the board was rescinding all fines and issuing a written apology. She said the board would also be conducting a review of all recent violations to ensure compliance with proper procedures. Vanessa interrupted. She said the board did not have the authority to rescind fines without a full vote. Lisa said they just took a full vote during the recess. Vanessa said she did not agree to it. Lisa said the vote was 2-1, and the decision stood. Vanessa stood up and said she was resigning from the board effective immediately. She grabbed her coat and her portable thermal printer and walked out. The room was silent. After the meeting, Lisa pulled me aside. She said the board was going to recommend a special election to fill Vanessa's seat and review the election committee's practices. She said there were concerns about ballot handling and proxy manipulation, and the board wanted an independent audit. She said she hoped I would consider running. I said I would think about it. That was the payback vector, a board election challenge that flipped the power dynamic. Vanessa built her power on controlling the election process, and now that process was being audited. She could not manipulate proxies if she did not have access to them. The next week, I got an email from Derek at the management company. He said the board had formally rescinded all fines related to my case and that the demand letter from my attorney was considered resolved. He said the management company was updating its snow emergency procedures to align with city guidance and that future enforcement actions would require written authorization from the full board. He also said Vanessa's resignation had been accepted and that the election committee was being reconstituted with new members. 2 weeks later, the city issued a written warning to the HOA over snow route interference. Marcus called me and said the city attorney's office had reviewed the complaint and found that the HOA's snow emergency enforcement practices created confusion and increased liability. The warning said the HOA had to submit all future snow removal policies to the city for review before implementation, and any violations would result in fines. The HOA reversed the policy to avoid those fines. That was the outcome. The minutes recorded the reversal and the reason. Karen's bluff got read out loud, and the room reacted. The funny karma beat was that Karen tried to flex authority, and the policy said she could not. I stayed in the house. The renovation finished on schedule. The deck boards look great, and the crawl space is sealed. I still see Vanessa sometimes driving through the neighborhood, but she does not stop. The new election committee held a vote in March, and I did not run, but I voted for Lisa. She won. The snow emergency rules are now posted on the website, clear and simple, and they match the city guidelines. The thermal printer notices stopped. I kept the ice scraper on the porch for a few more weeks, just because I could. Eventually, I moved it to the garage. But every time I see it, I think about that morning when Vanessa waved her printer at me like a badge, and I think about how her own words came back to bite her. Your camera does not matter, my minutes are the truth. Except the minutes were the truth, and they told everyone that she was wrong. I appreciate you sticking with me, and I will see you next time.